Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Great Strategic Rivalries, From the Classical World to the Cold War. Edited by James Lacey. Narrated by David Stifel. Publisher's note: this audiobook contains references to visuals present in the print and ebook editions of the book. Introduction. James Lacey. More than half of all wars since 1816 have taken place among enduring strategic rivals, while less than a fifth have been between states without any established rivalry. Surprisingly, given such a remarkable correlation, there are very few studies on the topic of enduring strategic rivalries. Though they have dug deep into the histories of particular rivalries, historians have not approached the topic in a thematic way to create a body of historiographical literature that allows one to compare and contrast rivalries across the ages. Political scientists have done little better. Until the late 1980s, they had not addressed the topic at all. But from the mid-1990s until approximately 2002, a small group of political scientists did conduct mostly statistical-based examinations of intrastate enduring rivalries. Then they went silent. For more than a decade now, the field of political science has offered little on the topic of enduring strategic rivalries. If one were to surmise a reason for the rapid passing of what at first appeared a fruitful field of research, the only apparent reason was that political scientists had exploited all of the available data. Given their approach, which mostly amounted to counting conflicts and determining the dates between them, there were only a limited number of variables to explore, and a relatively small data set with which to work. Political scientists quite literally ran out of inferences that they could make based on the data available to them. In short, they had exhausted all the possibilities for further research, at least with quantitative data capable of being gathered and modeled. Thankfully, those political scientists addressing this issue did not quit the field without first leaving us with a number of observations that clearly make a case for the central importance of enduring rivalries in international affairs, particularly those among great powers. Such observations provide an essential stepping stone for a deeper, historically based analysis of enduring rivalries, aimed at drawing out commonalities and possible lessons that endure across the centuries. Characteristics of enduring rivalries. What the data tell us. Enduring rivalries do not suddenly appear. Rather, they are the result of a series of previous interactions that appear to lock in future behavior. 1. As states interact and crises develop, one side invariably retreats. 2. Typically, states do not learn how to avoid future crises or methods of peacefully edging away from calamity. Rather, after each successive encounter, both parties tend to become more belligerent. 3. Moreover, the perceived winner of a previous dispute usually sees no reason to change its strategy during the next encounter, as it believes it can continue to get what it wants by continuing to hold to a firm line. 4. The loser, on the other hand, sees defeat as a matter of not having acted with sufficient strength or resolve. It therefore adopts a more coercive position in the future. 5. This apparently holds true even after a military defeat, where one might expect the losing state to behave with greater caution during a future dispute. The opposite is the case. The loser of a previous contest is almost always more belligerent in any future crisis. Pushing such data further demonstrates the profound effect that bullying has on future relations. In every data set examined by political scientists, save one, the third instance of bullying, threatening military conflict, led to war. Probably for reasons of reputation, a major power could not allow itself to be seen as repeatedly backing down in the face of threats. The only example of states avoiding war in this situation was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the threat of an impending nuclear holocaust hung over the proceedings. Unfortunately, or more probably fortunately, there are insufficient data to determine the overall effect of nuclear weapons on enduring state rivalries. It is impossible to build patterns out of a single data set containing a single example, the Cold War. Despite a few instances where one side replaced its strategic assessment with hope, for example, Japan versus United States, it is worth noting that the crises under study almost always occurred when both sides viewed the net balance of power between them as roughly equal, giving each a perceived chance of winning a conflict. Many therefore assume, based on the record, that weaker states are unlikely to provoke a crisis with a more powerful one. The historical record is likely more mixed than the data sets allow, particularly in the modern era. For instance, the data do not adequately capture the effect of a superpower standoff. During the Cold War, Cuba was capable of provoking any number of crises situations with the far more powerful United States, on the assumption that U.S. policymakers would draw back rather than allow a localized crisis to create a wider dispute with the Soviet Union. Moreover, the data failed to capture the effects of the edge of empire, or the edge of power. For instance, during World War II, Japan, with only 10% of America's industrial capacity, was able to withstand 4 years of total war before its collapse. The length of this struggle reflects the fact that as the war grew closer to Japan, its relative strength grew, as the United States was forced to project forces over greater distances. Similarly, 2,500 years ago, tiny Athens was able to resist the might of Persia because the Persians were capable of projecting only a fraction of their total power at the edges of their vast empire. In the future, even if the United States remains vastly superior to any other state in total military power, it may find it progressively more difficult to win in the immediate vicinity of a near-peer competitor. Further revelations from the study of the data sets include the following. Most enduring rivalries do not start out as long-term hate affairs. States often do not even perceive themselves as involved in an enduring rivalry for many years after its initiation, or after multiple militarized disputes. In the early years of a developing rivalry, the single most crucial factor in its continuance and militarization is domestic politics. In almost every case, hardening attitudes and increased belligerence correlate very closely to a rapid rise in the level of agitation not to retreat from a perceived provocation. Power shifts, real or perceived, double the chance of war. In this regard, shifts toward parity are most likely to start wars. For instance, a doubling of the U.S. nuclear arsenal is unlikely, according to the data, to inflame the U.S.-Sino-Proto rivalry, as increasing an already overwhelming U.S. nuclear preponderance does little to affect the current strategic calculus. On the other hand, a dramatic rise in Chinese nuclear weaponry aimed at achieving parity with the United States would radically alter each side's strategic calculus and would have a much higher probability of leading to conflict. A clear historical example of this effect was Germany's drive to build a fleet the equal of Great Britain's at the start of the 20th century. The course and consequences of each successive conflict within an enduring rivalry profoundly affect subsequent conflicts. For instance, the reasons for the French military defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, 1870 to 1871, directly affected its military approach in World War I, while the consequences of that earlier war provided the rationale for France's later war aims. All enduring rivalries appear to have certain strategic commonalities, an outstanding set of unresolved issues, strategic interdependence, a psychological manifestation of enmity, and repeated militarized conflicts, not necessarily war. Changes in preference and perception often affect the course of rivalries. For instance, when the United States no longer appeared interested in absorbing Canada, coupled with U.S. perception that it faced greater threats than those posed by Great Britain, it became much easier to manage both nations' commercial competition without militarizing disputes. Major shocks to the global system are a necessary catalyst and a key ingredient in the development of an enduring strategic rivalry. For instance, there was little room for a new strategic-level rivalry to take hold during the Cold War. Only after the demise of the Soviet Union was it possible for new rivalries to emerge. Similarly, it was the collapse of German power, as well as the fall of two other empires, Russian and Austro-Hungarian, in the wake of World War I, that opened the door for the emergence of new rivalries. Disputes among recognized enduring rivalries are 2 times more likely to end in war than isolated one-time disputes. Moreover, in the modern era, post-1815, or the Treaty of Versailles, 45% of all wars have been between enduring rivals. If one includes proto-rivalries, that total rises above 80%. Moreover, 90% of all enduring rivalries end with a shock to the global system. For instance, the Persian-Roman rivalry in the East abruptly ended with the rise of Islam, as both powers were eventually subsumed by the rising power. As we see from the preceding, the data collected and utilized by political scientists provide a number of crucial points for consideration. However, from the point of view of policymakers, there are several major problems with such an approach to examining enduring rivalries. This first becomes obvious in the widely accepted definition that political scientists have given to rivalries, which in their conception must always be militarized. Moreover, to be considered a rivalry, a certain number of disputes must be concentrated within a specific time span. Typically, if 2 rivals go 20 years without a militarized dispute, not necessarily a war, political scientists deem the rivalry at an end. The historical record, however, demonstrates that disputes can lie dormant for many decades before erupting once again into major intrastate conflict. Therefore, one must question the appropriateness of such an arbitrary number of 20 years. By applying such an artificial construct, all analysis of the decisions and events that keep the rivalry simmering go unexamined. Further, political scientists, in simplifying the data, do not make room for enduring rivalries that do not end up in a series of violent conflicts. In this formulation, competition is not rivalry. For the policymaker, the analytical exclusion of competitions that fall short of war presents a clear problem. How does one examine methods for keeping a competition, let us say a hard-fought global commercial rivalry, from turning into a shooting war? As a number of violent enduring rivalries arose only after a prolonged period of commercial, that is, economic competition, the political science approach neglects any examination of how to keep competitive interactions from creating the conditions for militarized hostility. Such disregard of enduring commercial rivalries that never become violent conflicts deprives policymakers of evidence-based guidance on how one might compete for economic predominance without causing a war. In establishing a complete set of guideposts for strategists and policymakers, it is therefore essential to scrutinize both 1. Commercial rivalries that have turned violent, and 2, those that remain peaceful. The first may illuminate untaken opportunities that could have avoided war, while the second may present lessons on the accommodations necessary for extending peace during periods of intense competition. Unfortunately, in this regard, the data underpinning political science research have little to offer. For commercial rivalries turned violent, the data tell us a lot about the number of disputes and their intervals, but present little in the way of explanation. In the latter, a nonviolent competition, the data are silent, as these conditions are not included in their data collections. The inability to explain events has always haunted political scientists. Though their data demonstrate that the militarized disputes are twice as likely to lead to war if there had been 2 previous such disputes, that finding alone does little to explain how such disputes got started, how they remain alive, or how one might avoid them. Explanations such as each dispute caused both parties to harden their positions so that war remained the only viable option remain merely suppositions, as data sets contain no evidence of actual hardening. Moreover, to make sense of the volumes of data typically employed by political scientists, they have developed techniques that tend in many ways to distort actual events. This is most often done by selecting 1 or 2 variables to test, while either ignoring or controlling for all of the other variables affecting a solution. In short, political scientists remove both the context and messiness of real-world situations. Policymakers and strategists, on the other hand, always work in a world filled with context and where messiness prevails. And in reality, extraneous variables are rarely controlled, as they wreak havoc on the best-laid plans. Grasping all of this contextual messiness requires one to go far beyond a reliance on data sets and to delve deeply into all of the factors and conditions that propelled history's various enduring strategic rivalries forward. Only by doing so can one draw out vital lessons on rivalry management that will assist policymakers in navigating the dangerous shoals of new or re-emerging rivalries already becoming visible on the global horizon. The essays used to underpin the observations presented here are not meant to replace the work of political scientists. Rather, they are the next logical step in developing a deep understanding of the character and nature of enduring strategic rivalries. A step that explains not only what happened, but why. Historical observations. Root causes. The existing literature on enduring strategic rivalries commonly breaks such rivalries into 3 main types. Unfortunately, the strategic pairs of rivalries examined for this project fail to bear out the existence of these simple categories. Spatial. Rivals contest exclusive control of a region. Ideological. Rivals contest the superiority of their particular belief systems, whether they are religious, economic, or political. Positional. A contest over relative influence and prestige within a system. Few of the great rivalries in history are centered on controlling a region. True, the military actions that go hand in hand with a strategic rivalry are often fought out in a certain, often small region, but this typically reflects the fact that either the geographic area is typically the point where 2 rivals can most easily get at one another, or contesting control of this region is acting as a trigger point for larger issues. Similarly, the evidence that enduring rivalries are maintained by deep ideological differences is at best not proven. Though ideological differences are often present in some of the rivalries, particularly in the modern era, in every case where a choice is required between ideology or advancing geopolitical interests, ideology is thrown away. Though ideology colors attitudes, and as a result becomes a prism through which rivals evaluate each other's actions, it rarely, if ever, plays a dominant role in determining state actions. Prestige and garnering influence, on the other hand, come with a specific problem. They are part of the reason behind every action of every state in existence, making it impossible to separate out the positional concerns of strategic rivals from the concerns they would have if the state had no rival. The evidence demonstrates that positional concerns mount once a rivalry is underway, with each party casting around for allies and other support from within the current state system. In fact, once a rivalry is underway, prestige becomes the dominant factor in pushing diplomatic crises toward war. Dismissing the current explanatory paradigm for strategic rivalries begs the question, what will replace it? As one reviews the historical examples, however, it becomes clear that there was no need to establish a new paradigm, as one already exists. What Thucydides wrote 2,500 years ago, as he elucidated the reasons for the Athenian-Spartan rivalry, still suffices to explain state motivations and actions in every rivalry under consideration in this work. And the nature of the case first compelled us to advance our empire to its present height, fear being our principal motive, though honor and interest afterwards came in. And no one can quarrel with a people for making in matters of tremendous risk the best provision that it can for its interest. It follows that it was not very remarkable action, or contrary to the common practice of mankind, if we did not accept an empire that was offered to us, and refused to give it up under the pressure of the three strongest motives: fear, honor, and interest. For the next 2,500 years, the idea of fear, honor, and interest has remained the best paradigm for explaining both the arrival and course of strategic rivalries. Where one can interchange the words prestige and honor, it is clear that in this regard, theorists have identified a long-recognized factor, but for reasons unknown have considered it important to rename it. As the classical scholar Donald Kagan has noted, where one nation seeking to improve its honor or prestige tramples on another state's interests, conflict becomes nearly inevitable. In this collection of essays, both Geoffrey Wawrow, Chapter 10, and Williamson Murray, Chapter 12, illustrate that many of Germany's pre-World War I actions were motivated by its desire to gain prestige in a European environment where it was viewed as the new kid on the block, having only become a unified nation in 1870. One would have to peer deep indeed to see any motivation besides attempting to increase its prestige, honor, for Germany to be provoking successive crises in Bosnia and Morocco between 1906 and 1911. Moreover, it is easy to see how the fear engendered by Germany's actions propelled the spate of alliance-making that aligned the great powers, England, France, Russia, against the German state. In defending this alignment, David Lloyd George, in his famous Mansion House speech, stated, "I believe it is essential that Britain should at all hazards maintain her prestige among the great world powers. I say emphatically that peace at that price, abandoning France, would be a humiliation intolerable for a great country like ours to endure." When war finally did break out, Great Britain, despite having clear economic interest in steering clear of the conflict, felt honor-bound to come to the aid of Belgium once it was under German assault. British citizens were given the practical reason that German conquest of the Channel ports put British trade and possibly the survival of the country at intolerable risk. This is not a trivial reason, but one can doubt the continuing strategic threat that control of the Channel ports presented after the end of the Age of Sail. But as Donald Kagan demonstrates by quoting British Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey, honor provided a deeper motivation. Britain could keep out of the war by issuing a proclamation of unconditional neutrality. If we did take that line by saying we will have nothing to do with the matter, we should, I believe, sacrifice our respect and good name and reputation before the world. Years later, Grey wrote that the real reason for going into the war was that if we did not stand by France and stand up for Belgium against German aggression, we should be isolated, discredited, and hated, and there would be nothing for us but a miserable and ignoble future. Britain could clearly see the risks to the standing national order presented by an aggressive German state, but it still felt the need to clothe the decisions that led it into war as acts of honor, without ever spending much time making a case for war based on its own interests. How much different it was 2 decades later, when Sir Neville Chamberlain defended his dooming Czechoslovakia by appeasing Hitler at Munich, by explaining the lack of British interests in the region. Demonstrating, however, that honor remained a crucial ingredient in geopolitics, Churchill said of the Munich Agreement, "The government had to choose between war and shame. They chose shame. They will get war." Despite having as few practical interests in Poland as they had in Czechoslovakia, both Britain and France, after the humiliation of Munich, felt honor-bound to go to war when Poland's sovereignty was threatened. It did not have to be this way. After the unification of the German state, Chancellor Bismarck clearly saw that both Russia and France perceived a unified Germany as a threat. To counter this, Bismarck undertook a charm offensive, aimed at keeping France isolated from any power that could help it gain revenge for its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, 1870. During his travels, Bismarck constantly repeated the phrase, "Wir sind satt," we are full, trying to convince Russia and others that Germany was now a satisfied power with no further territorial ambitions. Such protestations came with reminders of the long friendship between Russia and Prussia, which were both part of the coalition that defeated Napoleon and maintained the concert of Europe for the better part of a century. But as Henry Kissinger points out, honeyed words about conservative solidarity and the traditional friendship between Prussia and Russia meant nothing in the face of national self-interest. All Russia was able to see was a large and growing power on its border. Similarly, we will see, at the nexus of honor and interest, is war. By any measure, the German decision at the beginning of the 20th century to build a fleet capable of challenging Britain on the high seas was a foolish measure. In practical strategic terms, the effort consumed vast resources that Germany desperately missed when war erupted in 1914. Moreover, it did so with almost no practical gain, as the bulk of the German high seas fleet spent almost the entire war in port, taking no part in disrupting British commerce or even attempting to break the blockade that was strangling the German economy. Except for one brief foray out to Jutland, which ended in ignominious retreat as the British fleet approached, the German Navy was not heard from for the remainder of the war. What is remarkable in this entire episode is that with France and Russia already allied against her, Germany undertook the one measure that was sure to alarm Britain. By deciding to build a fleet that could contest the British Royal Navy on the high seas, Germany, in a single stroke, ended hundreds of years of Anglo-French hostility, as both former historic rivals found more to fear from the growth of German economic and military power than they did from each other. For the Germans, the building of a great fleet was a matter of honor, but for the British, The German fleet was a sword pointed at its heart. The German example of the relevance of
Sample complete. Ready to continue?